Hello everyone, welcome back to another Project Gladiator weather forecast. Today it might be a little bit of a longer video compared to my most recent forecast, and that's because I have 4 different regions of severe weather development to cover, but I am going to be covering the weather for June 5th of 2023. What we're currently looking at is a 4 marginal slight risk setups for many different locations across the United States. We have a marginal threat for southern Texas into the Rio Grande Valley, as well as a marginal threat for western Montana into northern Idaho, as well as a marginal threat where we don't usually see a whole lot of severe weather all that much, and that's for central California into a little bit of western California, as well as the marginal threat which is expected compared to yesterday through the North Carolina and South Carolina area into parts of northern Georgia. So that's currently what we're looking at as for our severe weather development threats. They're not going to be too strong, as there's not really a whole lot of strong fueling factors across the United States, because that high pressure system ridge is still blocking a lot of it. However, we do have a little bit of a tornado threat for the Rio Grande Valley marginal threat. It's a weak 2% where we could see the possibility of a brief tornado. As for our wind threat, all locations have a 5% damaging wind threat, and it's nearly identical for hail as well. So that's currently what we're looking at. Taking a look at our pivotal weather models, and let's start off with our 500 millibars so we can get a look at our triggering factors. Let's first start off with the marginal threat that's in North Carolina. So there is a blast coming south out of Canada to trigger some severe weather development in this region. You can see that blast here. This is expected to have wind speeds in the 500 millibars of the 30 knots to 20 knots. This isn't really expected to create a whole lot of shear, so I think our hail threat is going to be mostly in the very small to medium sized hail, probably not even the medium sized hail, mostly in the small because of how weak wind shear is. But then let's take a look at the California marginal threat. You can see that we have that low pressure system that I covered in the weekly overlook if you want to check that out. This low pressure system is expected to pull the subtropical jet further up north and kind of limit severe weather development in Texas, where we've currently been, last week we saw tons of severe weather because of that subtropical jet, but now it's being pulled up north through California to trigger severe weather development there, and is again blocking it from getting to Texas and triggering stronger severe weather development there. Some shear is expected with this, but I'll get into that later. You might have noticed the Montana marginal threat. There's not really all that much of a notable triggering factor that you can see clearly off the bat. This one took me a little bit of time to figure it out, but it is a shortwave trough left over from the convection last week to trigger severe weather development across western Montana into northern Idaho. It's kind of hard to see, but it is there in those very bright blues. You can see it there. Because of how weak this is, there is a little bit of weak convective inhibition, allowing for storm development to develop more easily compared to if there was stronger convective inhibition. It would take much more to get those storms going. So because of the weak convective inhibition, they can develop much more easily. Taking a look at dew points, I'm going to leave out the marginal threat in southern Texas for now. I will take a closer look at that towards the end of today's forecast, but I want to look at the rest of the marginal threats across North Carolina, Montana, and California for now with these dew points, and I'll take a closer look towards the end of the video at Texas. Let's take a look at the marginal threat that is in North Carolina for now. There is dew points that are in the mid to upper 50s and possibly the low 60s. Depending on our lapse rates, we could possibly see some moderate Cape values, mostly in the 1000s to 2000s range. But then let's take a look at the Montana marginal threat. We don't have all that much strong notable dew points in the marginal threat area. We do have stronger dew points towards the eastern Montana area, but that's not in the marginal threat region that we're currently concerned about. So dew points in the marginal threat region are mostly in the low 50s to upper 40s. This is going to lead to very weak instability, probably in the triple digits probably not expecting a whole lot of instability in the 1000s. But then let's take a look at the California marginal threat. Instability in the valley, in the center of California, does have dew points in the upper 50s to mid 50s, possibly the low 60s in some regions. This is going to help with instability, probably more in the moderate ranges of the 1000s to 2000s range, and this all depends on lapse rates, but seeing how it's California, we probably have some pretty strong lapse rates. Taking a look at our lapse rates, let's first start off with the marginal threat for North Carolina and South Carolina. We do have some fairly weaker and moderate lapse rates in the 6s, not really a whole lot in the 7s at all. This is going to help with whatever dew points we have, keeping instability, again, mostly in the moderates, probably the 1000s to weak 2000s range. But then let's take a look at the marginal threat back in Montana. Lapse rates do reach probably kind of the same amount in North Carolina, just slightly higher, where they do get up to the mid 7s in some locations. This is going to help with the weak dew points and boost up instability probably a little bit higher than what would typically be prominent with much weaker dew points. So Cape values are probably gonna again stay in the triple digits, possibly the upper triple digits, but most likely not in the 1000s range. But then let's take a look at the California marginal threat. Lapse rates are expected to be pretty strong because it is California. They have tons of deserts, but lapse rates in the 8s and 7s or 9s are gonna really help with instability with those mid 50s to low 60s in some locations. Again, probably instability, mostly in the moderates again. Taking a look at instability, starting off with the marginal threat that's in North Carolina, we do have instability. It's kind of hard to see because it's such a small location, but I gotta look at the entire United States. We do have Cape values that are in the triple digits to weak 1000s range, not really a whole lot in the 2000s range. Weak wind shear is not really going to be all that prominent, so hail is likely going to stay pretty small. Taking a look at the marginal threat back in Montana, Cape values do mostly stay in the triple digits and possibly the upper triple digits, but not a whole lot in the 1000s. However, some models are depicting a little bit of weak 1000s. However, I think weak 1000s are going to be possible, but very unlikely. Taking a look at the marginal threat for California, Cape values do mostly stay in the moderates in the 1000s, getting up close to 2000, but not reaching 2000s in pretty much anywhere. However, they do get really close in the upper 1000s range. 2000s are going to be unlikely. Some stronger shear compared to other locations is going to be expected for this California threat. So I'll show you guys that in a second. But we could possibly see some bigger hail, more in the small to medium sizes compared to everywhere else, excluding Texas. I will get to that later. Taking a look at the wind shear across the United States for the marginal threats, excluding Texas, I know that there is that 2% there, but we're going to focus on that later. So taking a look at the marginal threat for North Carolina, some weak wind shear can be seen on the leeward side of the Appalachian Mountains, which is expected a little bit, but however, it is fairly weak, but it could help with the possibility of some small to maybe smaller, medium-sized hail across eastern North Carolina, or western North Carolina. But let's take a look at the marginal threat back in Montana. We do have some isolated, marginally strong wind shear in some locations, which can reach the 20 knots in some locations. However, it's not expected to cause all that much of a tornado threat because dew points are fairly weak as well as Cape, and wind shear is pretty weak and isolated to very small areas. However, this is going to allow for some isolated small to medium-sized hail. But then let's take a look at the California threat. We do see a lot more wind shear compared to the other locations, which is expected because it is more mountainous, which could affect wind shear by either making it worse or making it better depending on the direction of the wind. Right now, it does look like it is making it a little bit better. So with whatever cape values in that valley, we could possibly see the possibility of some rotating supercells, maybe a brief funnel cloud, but it doesn't look all that likely because of how weak cape is. However, tornadoes as a whole do not look all that likely because of how weak cape is, but some rotating supercells could be possible back in that location. Now let's take a look at the Texas marginal threat with that 2% tornado threat. It might be a little bit complicated to understand, but I will show you guys what's going on with that 2% threat. Dew points in the mid to upper 60s, possibly the low 70s is going to help a lot with higher cape values, especially in the 70s range, where we could possibly see mid 70s and possibly cape values depending on lapse rates of the low to mid 3000s. That is where storms are expected to start off and develop, but I'll get to that when we take a look at cape. Taking a look at lapse rates for this area in particular, this location, where we have all that deep layer moisture and where I think the tornado threat could be possible, we do not have all that much of strong prominent lapse rates, so cape values are expected to be inhibited a little bit because of this, not be able to get up to their full potential if we had stronger lapse rates, but some diurnal heating should help boost the cape values with those deep dew points to the moderates and possibly higher in possibly the 3000s in some locations, especially along the coast. But because of weak lapse rates, cape values could be inhibited just a little bit. Let's now take a look at the instability for that marginal threat area. Keep in mind the weaker lapse rates could again inhibit cape values just a little bit, but especially along the coast where we have those dew points in the mid 70s, we do see some cape values that are reaching the weak to mid 3000s. With the help of sea breezes, storm development could be aided a little bit by sea breezes, but anywhere outside of that area, cape values are expected to drop rapidly the further west you go. So cape values the further west are expected to be mostly in the weaker moderates in the 1000s to 2050 range, and not be all that strong and not get up to their full potential because of weak lapse rates. But storm development is expected to begin developing along sea breezes and with that mid-level flow in the area where we see the strongest cape values. Some outflow boundaries are going to help aid with wind shear a little bit, as well as trigger some severe weather development along the marginal threat location. Now let's take a look at the wind shear associated with this 2% tornado threat. You can see wind shear is expected to be sufficient along outflow boundaries in those storms that develop along the sea breezes along the coast. Those outflow boundaries are expected to push outward and again trigger some severe weather development with the 500 millibars across the marginal threat area. But you can see it does aid with wind shear a little bit. You can see that it does look mostly insufficient, mostly providing wind shear that would be sufficient enough for some medium to large sized hail. But in some isolated locations, like right here for example, there can be some isolated sufficient wind shear which could be aiding in tornadic development, as well as overall helping with the hail threat a little bit, as well as providing with those cape values across all marginal threats. There is expected to be some damaging winds as well, and especially along these outflow boundaries. Now that I've told you the weather, please go down to the description and check out the show souls for Project Gladiator, and join the Discord for any updates in Project Gladiator, and hopefully I will see you guys tomorrow with another forecast.